So as I mentioned several months ago, I was assigned the topic of strategies for developing corporate culture, specifically corporate culture and team building. And what an opportunity this is, especially to take a few minutes at this interesting juncture of the world, global, and also national and regional community, where we're dealing with the economy that we are dealing with. I believe this is an actual best time to be talking about corporate culture and team building. And I say that with a straight face. I've loved marketing ever since my early teens. I would watch the Super Bowl, especially growing up in Denver. There was a time when the Broncos were doing pretty well, and they made it to the Super Bowl 3 times in the late 80s. The whole city was in a frenzy. I mean, it was Orange Crush time. And I loved watching the Super Bowl, and not just because of the football. I loved it because I wanted to watch the commercials. Now, back then, most of the ads were serious, and they were kind of focused on family, the humanity. They were trying to draw out the best of ourselves and sell their products. There was a lot of products that centered around cars and families that were enjoying riding in their car. So that I think I've got a picture of a Ford Taurus here next. And then I think it was in 1985 or 86, it was the Ford was the, this Taurus was the motor trend car of the year. Michelin tires featured adorable twins. UPS launched an overnight service in this brand new tear-proof envelope. So as a teenager, I would create a chart for all of my friends to rate their favorite commercials, and I'd give out just junk prizes for those that picked the winners. Now, of course, I was the final judge of the best commercials, and I still do this to this day. I get my friends and family, my kids around, and we judge Super Bowl commercials. And you might wonder what my favorite commercial was for 2020. It was this one here, called Smart Pack, for a variety of reasons. It just resonated with this audience. It was clever. It sold the product without overselling the celebrity. It was very descriptive. There wasn't a lot of feature benefits. You could just clearly see the outcome of this technology, and it sold itself. So my favorite commercial of 2020, Smart Pack. So why be so optimistic during such uncertain times? I mean, take a look at some of these slides that I just pulled in the last 12 days. Our financial systems are under stress. Businesses are downsizing. The unemployment claims are soaring. Consumer spending has plummeted. Supply chains are threatened. Cash flows are depleting. And let me show you just a few headlines. Here is one from the Salt Lake Tribune a few days ago. Unemployment at its highest rate ever in Utah. Then a slide after that, Deseret News showing layoffs pretty much region-wide, statewide. And then the next slide shows Cedar City News, where the parks have been closed. And, we're dealing with, just rampant unemployment and downsizing. Next slide. There's that Cedar City News there. And so here's the takeaway. This is what I truly believe. Times of crisis and uncertainty force a return to the fundamentals and time-tested business principles in order to manage through these times. This is an opportunity for you and your businesses to employ open, honest, clear, and timely communication. This is an opportunity for you and for me and for other businesses to build trust and demonstrate capable leadership. This is what your shareholders expect from you, and this is what the market will demand of you. This is an opportunity for you and your business to share your whole self and provide transparency into your corporate corporate culture. That's why I've got this little globe. It provides kind of a different perspective or a different view of how we could be looking at our circumstances today. It's an opportunity to invite your shareholders into your story by introducing them to the people, the places, and the values that make you who you are. And on the next slide, I have this little kind of word cloud that shows shareholders are many people, but especially in your circumstance today, in our environment today, who are our shareholders? Well, they include yourself, family, friends, peers, employees, current and potential customers, your boss, and in some cases, investors. So it's an opportunity really to refine your value proposition, your business structure, models, your client communication, your branding, and your PR strategy. In fine, it's an opportunity to be authentic, to be creative, and to become a leader. Okay, next slide. So what do I mean when I say sharing your whole self? Well, some of you might be familiar with the story of Keith Lamar. Keith Lamar was imprisoned at the age of 19 for selling drugs and killing a once childhood friend when his friend approached him at gunpoint and him and his gang were robbing this Keith Lamar, who you see pictured here. So he pled guilty to that crime, was imprisoned. 6 years after being imprisoned, he was allegedly accused of killing a guard during a prison yard riot. I say allegedly because there is a mountain of evidence showing that he was not involved. And even other prisoners came forward with their testimony of his innocence. Nevertheless, he was convicted, and this conviction forced him into solitary confinement for 16 years. 16 years in this room, no larger than a closet, a steel cage, where he has not been able to touch grass, see another person, or feel the wind on his face. He only has access to an armful of books and a paper and a pen. And here's a quote from a documentary about his life. Being in solitary confinement is really just being thrown upon yourself. You're running around just like people do in your regular life, and now all of a sudden you are confronted with yourself and find that in a lot of cases, you haven't really put anything into yourself to occupy yourself. Well, now while this is an extreme example of confinement, it does bear out the importance of investing in yourself and discovering who you really are. It's more than adapting to change, it's creating change to thrive in good times and bad. And this is especially true of businesses. Let me continue on this theme. One of the all-time great faith speakers of our generation said this about the COVID-19 crisis. This is a rare time of enforced solitude when we don't have a lot of trivial or superficial busyness distracting us from considering the truly important things in life. Such times invite us to look into our soul and see if we like what we see there. Again, the same is true of any organization, large or small, no matter how formal or informal it is. It's especially true of businesses. 6 years ago, the Desert News published an article that I wrote about corporate culture, where I said, your company culture is a living, breathing entity that is supercharged with purpose and fueled by a drive for excellence. And once nurtured and fed, it takes on a life of its own. So now we find ourselves amidst the greatest health crisis of my lifetime, while rushing into a second recession in as many decades. In these times of market reset and social distancing, what can we do? This crisis, coupled with competition in the marketplace, can drive your business to extinction, or it can be the catalyst for innovation and creativity. And I prefer to focus on the latter. I like to take the balance of our time to focus on the positive and what some practical methods and perhaps provide some recommendations on how you can transform your business culture in your sphere of influence and build up your peers, your teams, and your company during these uncertain times. Let me offer a few practical recommendations that I think you'll be able to utilize immediately after logging out of this presentation. Number one, let's reframe the term social distancing. I think it's been overused. I think it misleads us a little bit when it comes to interacting with those that we care about the most. So I would propose that we call it physical distancing. Businesses cannot afford to social distance, especially now, if they ever could have, ever. In fact, socially connecting with your peers, employees, and customers is the single most important activity we could do right now. Doing so will enable our businesses to not only survive, but thrive. So how do we do that? Well, we need to build community. We need to take this opportunity to connect with our peers, employees, and team members. Sometimes fear makes us feel powerless. Leaders can help the people around them feel safe by strengthening the community. And how is that possible when people are being asked to work from home? We're doing calls on Zoom and Teams. Our workplaces sometimes feel like petri dishes. My teenage son his room smells like one. We've been there so long, but we must make mental well-being a focus alongside of health and safety. Take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Notice how our current state of affairs has focused us on the bottom two sections, the green and the purple section there. That safety needs and psychological needs. Those are the basic needs. We are back to that quadrant right now as we are hunkered down in this phase of quarantining. And so this is why it's been harder to focus, because we're down in that lower quadrant of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and rightfully so. It's been harder to focus. It feels like it takes twice as long to get things done. We've been more irritable. We are craving connection. We've been feeling overwhelmed and physically exhausted. Planning for the future seems like the furthest thing from our minds. We only have enough mental energy to focus on the immediate. We have been instinctively prioritizing self-care and family. We have been grasping to control what we perceive to be controllable, like buying up toilet paper, because so much is in fact uncontrollable and unpredictable right now. Next slide. And the slide after that. So please know that this is normal. We're not slackers. We're not going nuts. We should not compare ourselves to others. We should not buy into the narrative that if we were just a better person, then we would, I don't know, fill in the blank. If we're a better person, we'd be more fit. We'd be more well-read. You'd get outside more. You'd spend more time here or less time there. It's okay to not be as productive. We're all experiencing a level of trauma on a global scale, and it's okay just to be, and it's okay to seek help. And it's important to communicate that to our shareholders, ourselves, our family, our friends, our peers, our employees. So take a minute and write down one or two pieces of advice. Let's go back to that list before, Melinda. And write down one thing. There we go. Write down one thing that you feel you could change in your so-called daily routine to make a change this week in one of these areas. I'll give you just 20 seconds to identify one of these that you feel you might spend a little more time working on. Okay, now that you've identified that, let's dive deeper into 5 things that you can keep in mind when working with your peers and employees to address each one of these items on this slide during this crisis. So we mentioned it a little bit before. I know that this next slide, being open, generous, and honest, it might seem like a given, but sometimes our natural reaction during a crisis is to withdraw. But going radio silent on your peers and team members is, it'll have the exact opposite effect of the positivity and productive workplace that you're trying to maintain. Next slide. Don't expect this to happen in an email or video conference. with a group, when things are changing quickly, the one thing that helps us maintain a sense of control is one-on-one communication. Now, if you're a leader in your business, it's important that you set some boundaries. You're the person that's the closest to the information, and you must walk the fine line between, sharing openly with your team the information that's flowing, and also keeping certain information kind of close to the vest. Knowing when to filter a certain level of information from others is an important part of crisis management. On the next slide, I feel it's so critical to listen to the feedback that you're receiving. Consider what assurances your peers and employees need to feel in order to have a safe work environment at home, or if they're of a critical and essential nature, they're heading in to the front lines. Address these questions and be sure to approach them head on and listen to their feedback. There are new topics that they need to be privy to. Technical support, health and safety, emotional well-being, employee benefits. And there's some external pressures too that are facing our peers and employees. There's financial challenges, childcare worries. There's some that have elderly parents and so forth. So your company may not be able to address all of these things that your employees are facing, but you should be aware of those issues and be compassionate about them. Be willing to throw some rules out. This is a good time to review your travel, sick leave, and remote working policies. This current state of affairs is not going away anytime soon. Communicate your willingness to work with people and advocate for them during this time of stress. They'll remember this long after the crisis has ended. Not long ago, I had to sign a document, and they required blue ink instead of black ink. Well, now's not the time to be that stressed over the color of ink. There's some things that we can be a little bit flexible on. This slide says lead with empathy, and I think it's important. It's important to recognize that your peers and your employees are foremost human, and at the same time, we're trying to hold our own crap together, and everyone has families and lives outside of work that are deeply important to us. And so by leading with empathy, we can demonstrate a dedication to those that we consider our shareholders. All right, now let's shift to customers. This really is a time to focus on delighting our customers. The ramifications of crisis management, or more importantly, mismanagement, will last well beyond the end of this crisis. I really believe that. Our customers are watching very carefully how we react to uncertainty and change. You may remember the first wave of emails that you got where, how certain businesses are handling the COVID crisis, that they're sanitizing and they're going to require this and of their employees, and they're providing all of the safety measures and so on. Well, responding to the COVID-19 requires us to lead as much with our humanity and compassion as with our technical skills, products, and services. And so now you're seeing businesses focus on, well, wait a second here. We're in a new normal. We're going to have to figure out how to make a difference, how to turn a profit, how to meet our overhead and drive revenue. And so I'm going to make you this promise. It's a guarantee. It's a guarantee right here and right now that if you remember nothing else from my presentation, I hope you remember this, and I promise you the following, that your customers are going to remember how you made them feel more than anything else that you do during this time of crisis. Will they feel that they were treated fairly? Will they feel that you listened? Will they feel that you were flexible? Will they feel understood? Will they feel like they belong to your customer community? And let me show you a few examples of customer community. And maybe you can pull from some of these examples, some good and some bad, to adopt into your own company, your own division, your own teams. And I'll start with the poor example. I received this letter, is that 2 days ago? April 13th. And it says, demand for our storage units continues to be very high, and like other businesses with a fixed supply of product, we're adjusting our prices respond to the demand. So they've increased my storage unit by almost 20%. I consider that poor timing, poor form. I would have preferred something like, we've been holding off a price increase for some time, and we're going to for another 90 days until we get through this crisis. And until then, we hope you're doing well. We hope that this delay in increasing our rent prices will help you through this time. Instead, it's, we've got lots of demand and we're taking advantage of it. Really poor example. Now let's focus on a couple of positive examples. And these are recommendations for how to avoid going negative or building a negative community, and focus on building a positive community with your customers. Don't go all technical on your employees and peers. There are some that aren't that, savvy with technology, and I think we risk having technology be a little overused. It's necessary, it's critical, but I would recommend that you pick up the phone, drop off a gift on someone's front porch, go the extra mile. A local spa here in Spanish Fork by the name of Summit Spa and Float, they brought over a little cellophane bag. It had Andes mitts in it to represent the summit, and it had a little scented oil vial to represent the spa. And they dropped it off and just said, thanks for being a customer. We're thinking about you, hope you're well. And they doorbell ditched me and took off. And I'm gonna remember that. And I've been an okay customer, but I'm gonna remember that for some time. And that's a perfect example of embracing your community, your customer community. So next slide, you really have an opportunity to communicate at a really high level and in a really human way. And that can't just be accomplished through email and Zoom. So watch the overuse of technology. Next slide talks about leveraging one of my favorite rules of life, the 80-20 rule. This rule states that 80% of your revenues comes from 20% of your customers. And so figure out how to connect with 20% of your customers and do that every month. And that's a very targeted group of people, and they could live anywhere in the state, the nation, or the globe. Now, here's what a chocolate bakery is doing. This company is out of Orem, Utah. First of all, if you go to their website, they publish a real sincere comment regarding the COVID-19 crisis. And as you read it, it's actually more than just what they're doing to keep their employees and customers safe. It outlines 4 ways that you can place an order and receive your treats from the comfort of your car. And the second thing that they did was they launched a brand new product. Take home sugar cookie kits. And they're now selling a dozen unfrosted sugar cookies cut out to a theme of your choosing. And you can phone it in and say, I want dinosaurs, or I want something about Star Trek, or Easter eggs, or the spring, or Mother's Day. And they'll make the cutouts for you. You pick them up, and then parents and guardians, along with frosting, and you have something to do at home together with your kids, all the while getting a little sugar fix. So this company prepared enough kits to last what they felt would be 1 week. They sold out of all of their kits on the very first day. And finally, if you haven't heard already, Pluralsight, they're providing free training on their platform during the month of April. And that's a real cool thing. If you haven't heard of that, it's a nice platform where you can download some videos and learn about any skill. So now, before you do this exercise in your teams or in your company to find out what your business might do, be sure that you have some creative engines running and be ready to share your ideas in a safe yet creative environment. It's time to get the virtual whiteboard out. No idea is a bad idea. So start with a corporate culture checkup. Be prepared to answer the following questions. Why do you exist? Next slide. What future do you want to help create? How do you create that future? And who are you? What are your values? How do you work? In order to evaluate your corporate culture, it might be helpful to look at the following chart. Let's have you take a moment on the next slide here and classify where you think your company currently sits on this chart. Notice that this chart places relationships on the y-axis and results on the x-axis. And so if your company, values results over everything and anyone else, well, then you're in the lower right-hand quadrant, and that would be considered a pretty cutthroat culture. If your company sits somewhere in the middle, they place some value on relationships and some value on results, then you're in this sort of middle comfort culture. But the most efficient quadrant is a company, a division, a team that places high value on results and high value on their relationships. That's a very constructive culture. I consider that a championship culture. So take a minute right now as you view this chart, and mark down where you think your company sits right now. Maybe 3 weeks ago, going into this crisis, where did your company most appropriately sit on this chart of culture types? Were you a country club, some results, and a little more relationship oriented? Were you a competitive culture? More value on results and some value on relationships. Now write down something that you've learned so far from today that you feel would improve your corporate culture. It might be better communications with your peers, ideas on how to gauge your customer. And if you don't have an action item yet, leave that blank, and we can come back to it later, because I'm going to share a few more examples of what other companies are doing to improve their corporate culture and their team building during this crisis. On the next slide, you will see that there's this big word value. And to really make this exercise worthwhile, you need to focus on value-added content. And here are some examples of content that adds value to your community of customers. You could share your core values, showcase your people to your customers, tell your origin story. Many of your customers don't know how your business started, or what makes your division tick, or what it is that you wake up thinking about. So share your successes, share your failures, take people behind the scenes. On the next slide, you may recognize this image, this individual. Catherine Lee is her name. She was known as Delta Lena. Safety videos about 15 years ago were very boring and extremely uninspiring. And then in 2008, Delta came out with this video of Delta Lena taking us through the safety requirements before a flight. And it really changed the game for airline videos. They elevated the videos to capture our attention, number one, but it was also a success because it was a departure from the conventional. And this is the famous finger wag, of course, of that video. Now, over the past 10 years, Delta's safety videos have evolved even more. Some are more serious, others are comedic. But most recently, what Delta has done is they've shifted to featuring real flight attendants, real employees, and real pilots from all over the globe. So they're employing that number two feature for valuable content, and that is they're showcasing their people to their customers. The next idea is it's important to map your concepts to the right people, to send your message to the right audience. Culture marketing isn't just about telling your story. It's about telling the right story to the right person. You may have different audience members that you're communicating through with all of your content, so make sure you map the right message to the right audience. Now, here's an example of knowing your audience. So by now, we all know it's important to wash your hands regularly, frequently, and for 20 seconds. Well, here's how the CDC published that information on March 3rd. I know you can barely read it. I think that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. Who's going to take the time to review this material? I think somewhere in there it might mention 20 seconds, but they've recommended that restaurants and other places in the early days of March were to post this everywhere. Well, let's take a look at Round Rock, Texas Chamber of Commerce. This is how they publish that same information. They truly know their audience. All right, 2 final thoughts, and then I'll summarize. Now, while you do these corporate culture exercises, keep in mind that we eventually will come out of our caves. It will be prudent, if not required, that we continue to practice social distancing. And so you may see restaurants, and I believe we will, and church pews, and other areas where we normally would have gathered in more masses. They're going to be staggered. They're going to be staggered 6 feet apart. Many human services are going to be by appointment only. We're going to see plexiglass shields in more places for longer term. This is going to be our new normal. And I believe we're going to see more services available through our car window. So my recommendation is to be in front of this curve by brainstorming how your businesses can leverage this shift. Also, when you do this exercise, don't focus solely on features and benefits. On the next slide, I think it says outcomes. Focus on your outcomes. And the slide after that, I get more specific. Drill down, my product is for people who believe what? I will focus on people who want what? I promise that engaging with what I make or with what I do will help you get or feel the following. And I know you will take this away from my product or service. So in summary, culture marketing is an opportunity to share your whole self and provide transparency into your brand. It's to bring people into your story by introducing them to the people, places, and values that make you who you are. On the next slide, I think I've articulated a few of these ideas. So the best of luck to you as you and your organizations navigate this new normal, that you focus on culture and marketing and team building in today's health and economic crisis. I hope that you can continue to focus on your peers and employees and customers on the next slide by doing these things: building a community, communicating clearly and often, solicit feedback and listen to it, throw out some of the mundane rules, lead with empathy. For your companies, consider doing this culture checkup that I referred to. Share your core values with your shareholders. Showcase your people to your customers. Tell your origin story. Share your successes and your failures. Take people behind the scenes. Map your message to the right audience. Stay ahead of the curve and focus on your outcomes. And remember, there is no better time than now, I believe, to focus on your innovation and creativity than at the times that we find ourselves in right now. And I really do wish you all the best of luck as you focus on your shareholders, your messaging, and your strategy on how to navigate the world that we live in during these times. All my best to you. Thanks again for having me.